thank you for joining, and really looking forward to sharing a few ideas with you, but also holding a space where you're able to talk to each other and explore things together as well. And I'm going to share my screen first. Well, first of all, could you all just by way of instructions, I'm not going to go around the whole room given the numbers, but if you could put into the chat your name and your favorite story. Some of you who've got more than one person in the room can either go for a shared effort or one each. But if you could put in the chat your name and your favorite story. Doesn't have to be, it could be a short story, a long story, a film, a book, a fable, a nursery rhyme, don't mind what, but your favorite story. Just pop that into the chat, and let's see what we've got. Martha's gone in first with an emoji as well. I like that, the Lion King. Charlotte's Web, the Gruffalo. Great. So they'll start populating there. Thank you for that. Whilst we spend some time together today, we will finish for 12:30. So we're likely to finish a little bit before 12:30, hopefully, but I'm anticipating that we'll finish by 12:30. And if I'm still talking at 12:30, you just press the red button at the top of the screen that says leave on it, and you just leave at 12:30. So we'll definitely not run over or be late. And there'll be some interactive elements today, some stuff for you to put into the chat. We're going to use a few different online tools as well, and there'll be some chance for breakout rooms. So I encourage you to, for this next 80 minutes, just to give yourself the chance, I suppose, to take a bit of time to think, a bit of a break from your regular meetings, and a chance to hopefully learn something new. And you might not learn anything from the things I'm going to share, but hopefully you'll learn things from each other or your own ideas that come to you as we're discussing this. And they're probably the most important things to think about in terms of learning, the ideas and thoughts that come to you whilst you're considering some of the things that I'm going to share today. So hopefully the first thing, and this might be the most useful thing I'm going to share today, I've discovered something new in terms of doing online meetings. I don't know if everyone knows about this, but if you want to share some PowerPoint slides whilst you are in a Teams meeting, if you actually go to rather than using the share button in the Teams meeting, if you go to PowerPoint, there's a new button called Present in Teams, which I'm just going to start doing now. And when you present in Teams, when you use that function, you get a totally different lot of the way in which things are, and I'm going to post that in the chat now. 1 second. So not only do you get the slide that you're working on, you can see more people at the top, but you can also see your upcoming slides at the bottom. So some of you will know how to do that, but I've just discovered it. So I thought if you get nothing else from the webinar today, you'll have a more effective way to share in Teams. So we're going to be talking about telling our story of change today. My name's Ken Masser. I suppose I am specialising in systems leadership and system change, and really thinking about the public sector in particular. I've got an organisational psychology and restructuring background. Used to work for a company called KPMG doing organisational change. And for the last few years, I've been leading the Together an Active Future project, which is one of Sport England's system change local delivery pilots, which has been about a £10 million investment in system change. And a couple of years ago, founded a advisory organisation to support other places to think in whole systems approaches and to lead change in new ways, so we can really kind of tackle inequality. And I'm developing my storytelling art, if you like, over the last few years. And I'm by no means a storytelling expert, but recognise how important storytelling is in terms of trying to help people to see and do things differently. So what are we going to cover today? Well, first of all, we're going to start to think about understanding frames. We're going to look at some of the key principles of storytelling. We're going to think about public narrative for social change, and that's one methodology, if you like, for storytelling. You're going to have a little bit of a go or a think about the stories that you might tell in a work context. And then we're going to start to think about our collective story. So what does it mean in terms of message discipline? And what's the story that's emerging in Cardiff and the Vale? in terms of our work specifically around physical activity and healthy weight, and then think about some next steps as in terms of individual action planning. So that's what we're going to run through today. Before we start, if you want to grab your phone, or you can do this online, we're just going to do a quick Menti. So you can use that QR code. I'm actually going to just flip over to a different screen. So if you've not caught that yet, but getting your phone out, you'll still be able to join in a second. Just seems to work a bit better if we do it this way. Can you see that now? So if you go to menti.com using this code or scan that QR code and start and just answer those 3 questions for us, that will give us a sense of where we are to start with. We'll just take a minute or 2 to do that. Hopefully you can all see it. I can't see you now, so if someone's waving at me or saying I don't know what to do, then you'll have to unmute and shout out. Great. I think that's probably most of us. So that's a really good start. I'm going to come back and kind of look at that at the end as well. So thank you for that. So we're going to start with thinking about frames. So this is the first big principle that we're going to think about in terms of storytelling, and it's called the framing effect. And the framing effect or framing bias is part of psychology, if you like, called cognitive bias. And it's this idea that we're all drawing different conclusions from the same information, potentially depending on how the information is presented, but also potentially from the way in which we see the world, some of our internal dialogue, our internal biases, our internal stories. So when I show you these 2 pictures, if you can imagine yourself, you're going into the local supermarket, Asda or Tesco or other supermarkets, they come in all shapes and sizes. Which one are you most likely to buy? Which one is more appealing to you? And just pop into the chat if it's easy for you, either the word left or the word right. Which one would be most appealing to you? And I think fair to say the one on the left, right? I'd prefer it to be 80% lean beef. And take the point, Leanne, that some of you don't eat meat at all, and that's probably a good thing. But the way the information's the same, right? 80% lean and 20% fat. It's the same. The fact is the same, but the way in which it's presented is different. If I was to share with you this one, that spray A leaves 1% of germs and spray B leaves 99%, kills 99% of germs, which one would you go for now, left or right? Or A or B? Okay, so you choose the one that's 99%. It's going to kill 99% of the germs, but again, the fact is the same. I'm either going to leave 1% of the germs, I'm going to kill 99% of the germs. It's the same, right? How about this one? Imagine a really expensive car. Say the car's, I can't do the maths, but whatever 5% is. So say the car is £500,000. Would you rather have 5% off or 25 grand off? And again, if those 2 things equate, it doesn't look like a £500,000 car, does it? Probably need a new picture for this one. But you get the idea that depending on how things are framed, depends on the way in which we see the world and the decisions that we might make. So why do frames matter? Well, they matter because we all make decisions based on the way in which we see the world. So if you think about your work, the way in which you invest, the way in which you commission services, the way in which you share resources, the way in which you approach meetings and discussions with colleagues, the way in which you write reports, they're all based on the way in which we see the world, or the stories that we're telling ourselves. And if we hone in on some of the work that you've been doing in Cardiff and the Vale around eating well and moving more, there are all kinds of frames that we potentially are coming up against or bumping up against in terms of our work. And if we want to change the way things are, we have to change the stories that we're both telling ourselves and the things that we believe. So some of the common frames that we might see in a public sector setting, or particularly when we're thinking about physical activity, a healthy weight, and these are three frames in sort of literature about this, is we get this idea of individualism. It's the individual's problem. It's their thing to solve. If an individual in communities is inactive or overweight or has got an unhealthy diet, it's for them to sort out. It's their thing. It's an individual approach, and there's not much we can do about it. Another key frame that we might come up against is this idea that it's someone else's job. It's the health board's problem to solve. It's the council's problem to solve. It's third sector's problem to resolve. So we can quite often think about it being someone else's issue to deal with. Or we get the third frame, which is fatalism, which is that's just the way it is. And it's always been like that, and it's always going to be like that. Almost this mindset of there's not much we can do about it, and perhaps we don't need to. Perhaps it's a waste of time to try because it's just the way it is. And so you might recognise some of those frames, or have thought about those before. So we're going to come on to our first little activity now. I want you to think about. I'm going to put you into small groups of 3s and 4s, and I want you to talk about together what is one of the unhelpful or problematic frames or mindsets that you come across in your work, and you can share that and talk about that together. And then I want you to come up with, well, what could a new frame be? What would be the preferred thought or mindset that we'd like people to have about that? And I've jotted down a few ideas in this little box at the bottom here. If you can't think of any yourself, sometimes we hear things like healthy food's too expensive, or there's not enough money for us to in the local system, or we can't influence individual behaviour, or people living chaotic lives, they're never going to make healthier choices. These are some of the things that we sometimes hear in our work. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms. We're going to take about 5 minutes or so. I want you to think about those two questions. What's some of the frames or mindsets that we think are perhaps problematic or unhelpful that we come up against, and what could a new frame be? And we'll share some of those when we come back. So let me see if I can get this to work. So we're going to, like I say, be in groups of 3s or 4s, and you'll have about 5 minutes. So we'll come back just after 11:20. So I've hit create on those rooms now. It's just got the little whirring blue circle, and soon you should start to be invited into your breakout room. So you'll either move automatically, or sometimes you get a little button at the top to press. And hopefully in a second or two, you'll all start to disappear. Good. So hopefully that was a useful discussion. So this is one of the main core principles, this idea of recognizing that there's different frames, and we're telling ourselves different stories. And in terms of the art of storytelling, it's really important to think about, well, what is the perspective from which the story is coming? But importantly also, what is the perspective from which the story is being received? What is it? What's the mindset or the frame that I'm trying to change here, or adapt, or resolve, or sometimes break completely? And storytelling is one of the key tools we've got to reframe beliefs. If people can see things differently, then they're likely to try and do things differently. So when you look at this little GIF, some of you will recognize this character. If I was to say to you, spinach makes you strong, spinach is, what word would you type in that blank there, based on the frame that you've got about this character?
Good.
Yeah, spinach is good for you, right? And that's the frame with which we're all seeing spinach based on this character. Obviously, we know some other things about spinach, but if you look at the GIF more closely, it looks to me like Popeye is not very happy when he swallows the spinach, and it goes down with some difficulty. And you may not know this, but actually what happens when Popeye has spinach is he gets it's an allergic reaction. that makes his muscles, his forearms and his legs in particular, pop out like that. And it's quite an unnatural reaction if you look. Like, there's not many people who have forearms that big, but then their upper arms. So he's got his little, quite a strange shape to his arms. And he really doesn't like spinach at all. And spinach just makes his arms swollen. And actually, spinach is not good for you at all, and it doesn't make you strong. And so you can see that if you present if you try to change the narrative of the story, this is a very simple example, but if you try to change the narrative of the story or to reframe it in a new way or explain it in a different way, people can start to potentially have a different belief about a particular topic, about physical activity, about a healthy weight or whatever it might be. And so storytelling can be a really important part of that. So one of the most powerful ways to reframe beliefs, perspectives, and paradigms is through the art of storytelling. So what makes a good story? Well, in essence, a story is a piece of information that's wrapped in some sort of emotion. And I think there's five key ingredients, if you like, to storytelling generally. We're going to come on to storytelling in the context of work soon. But in essence, I think in a work setting in particular, these three elements of storytelling are a really good guide. So first of all, stories should be concise. And we often think about 1 to 2 minutes for a story. So if you imagine yourself in a work meeting or in a presentation or in a discussion with colleagues, 1 to 2 minutes is about the right length of time for you to be trying to share an idea or tell a story that's challenging an existing paradigm. And the reason being concise is important is because there's often lots of things to cover in these meetings, and the longer you go on, the more difficult it is for people to get the idea that you're trying to put across or to understand the point that you're trying to make. And that leads us on to point 2, for them to be direct. So be clear. You need to be clear in your mind. What's the point of the story that you're telling? What is it, the key message that you're trying to get across? It's important to be specific. So this adds some of the emotion, gives some vivid details. I mentioned there, for example, if it looks hard for Popeye to swallow the spinach, for example, and you can see his swollen forearms. The more you can add a little bit of detail to your story, a few vivid details, it starts to bring it to life. Stories need to be structured and easy to follow. You've all probably been with friends or colleagues or at a party or a social event where someone's telling you a story and you start to lose track of who's who, what's going on. Keep jumping forwards and backwards and forwards in time. So it's important to think about what's a clear way, an easy way for me to tell a story that everyone can follow, and that we do it in an engaging way. And there's something about the pace and tone of our voice, but also there's some ideas around adding intrigue or a bit of a twist where things are different than expected. Lots of ways to create engagement, but it's important that it is engaging. So if you haven't, you might want to jot those few ideas down. So it's important to be concise, looking to be direct and getting to the point, or being clear about what the point is, specific, bringing in some vivid details, an easy to follow structure, and an engaging pace and tone. So there's some of the key principles to storytelling. Now, in the context of work, what we often refer to in terms of our storytelling is this idea of public narrative. And public narrative is a way of using stories developed by Marshall Gantz, in the sense of using stories as a leadership art to translate values into action that engage our heart, head, and hands. Trying to use stories to change the way people see and think about the world that will lead to action, that will lead to a change in the way things are. And public narrative follows a fairly simple framework. So there's three elements of a public narrative story, and some of you will have seen this before, and I'll share an example of what this looks like in a minute. So first of all, there's this idea of a story of self, this idea of bringing your own authentic self, your own story, your own values to the fore, and being able to express that why is it that this is important to you? What is it in your story or your values or of who you are or those closely related to you that motivates you and drives you to want to change things? You've then got this idea of the story of us, this sense of translating that idea or the thing that you're thinking about in terms of your own story of self and translating that to be meaningful to a wider audience, to the community, to the people that you're speaking to or the people that we care about, or more broadly the people in your place. So this idea of collective experiences, applying your own personal experience into a more general context, and finally pointing all of that then to action, to a sense of we need to now do something, a strategy in action. What is it that we're going to do, and how, in a sense of hope and aspiration and urgency for change, an invitation for people to commit to action and to change the way things are. And this has been a really for probably 20 plus years now, a method of telling stories in the public domain that's had quite a lot of research done, and quite a lot of examples where you can think about the stories that you're hearing in this context, but you can also start to plan the stories that you tell in this way that's research suggests is a really powerful way to change behavior. So I want you to have an example of what this looks like. And so we're going to take a little break. And rather than me playing this on the screen for us all, because sometimes that doesn't work, I'm going to post a link to this in the chat. It lasts for just over 5 minutes. So when I post the link in the chat, switch your cameras off, open the YouTube video, and watch that for yourself and come back in 6 or 7 minutes time. But as you watch this video, it's a 5 minutes 30 speech. And I want you to think about and jot down, what's the story of self that you hear? So what is the story that this man is telling about himself? How does he then relate that to all of us? And what's the action, the story of now? What's the action that he encourages people to do? And we'll discuss that in a minute. So I want you to watch this video. I'll post the link in the chat. I want you to watch this video and then highlight, just jot down a note to yourself, what's the story of self? What's the story of us? What's the story of now? And this is a really good example of someone who's moved through these 3 phases quite clearly and distinctly in this little 5-minute video. So knock your cameras off, go on mute if you haven't already, go and watch this video and come back at 11:40. So that'll give you a bit of time to watch it and then a minute or so to think about it. So I'll see you at 11:40. So let's open this up for a bit of discussion then, just for a few minutes. How did that make you feel? How was that received for you? Anyone feel that they want to share or give their sense of how that speech or story worked? Cheryl.
It's really powerful, isn't it? Because it kind of took you through, as you say, a story from his experience to his friends and others, and then a really positive outcome as an action. So it went from really, challenging circumstances that he'd seen others go through and families, etc., but actually ended on a really positive and kind of bringing people together at the end to say, we can do this, we can make a change. It was quite powerful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And just 5 minutes, right? Sometimes we think there's got to be like this, let's do a whole day workshop on some of this stuff, or let's have long 3-hour meetings about it. Well, actually, the best things happen in just a handful of minutes often. Anyone else want to share any thoughts or reflections?
I think Dan's hand is up, Ken.
Great, we'll go to Dan first and then Siani next.
Yeah, I quite like the call to action, because often when you see these scenarios play out, you might have someone who's personable like that, or sort of talks well of themselves or the collective, but doesn't necessarily give you a route for action. So sometimes you might sort of go, oh yeah, I'm really angry about that, or this is terrible, but then you don't know what to do next. So he said, if you want to get involved, and they've kind of got a campaign strapline with catch them before they jump. So if you take anything from it, you're going to take that as a literal and metaphorical message that I have to do something to stop this happening again. So in terms of like the handover from me to you as the message giver, I thought that was really, really powerful.
Yeah, thank you. And I loved the way that there was it was a really clear ask as well, wasn't it? There was several clear asks that we could connect to. This idea of, tell your story, get in front of a camera. Yeah, really good. Would you like to share as well?
Yeah, one of the things I quite liked, because it's such a controversial thing, and a lot of people do make it us and them. And he very successfully spoke about multiple different reasons. And when he was talking about something that he loved, which everyone loves something, the different aspects of what he loved about it would reach almost everyone, where it was music, discipline, the feel of the clothes, all the different things. And that would hit most people in an audience. So yeah, thought it was really good.
Yeah, thank you. And also in the middle bit, when he was relating it to the story of us, he talked about how this could apply to other groups and audiences as well, the same principles. Yeah, great. Thank you, Lauren.
I liked the urgency of the message that he was giving. You felt, oh gosh, you've got to do something now. This has to happen now. And he did that in a really engaging, clever way without, there wasn't panic in it, but it was definitely a strong call to action for now, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, a really good example of this idea of public narrative. And I think, one of the things that I've realized or I'm learning over the years is that this takes some planning, right? It takes some thinking about. So quite often when we drift into storytelling mode, I think that's often what we're doing. We're drifting into storytelling mode. It almost feels a bit conceited and a bit manipulative to be thinking about and planning our stories in advance, potentially. And quite often we can drift into stories that are not, if we skip back a few slides, that are not concise, that are not direct or specific or structured, that don't have that clear sense of ask at the end. We're sort of sharing experiences and things that we've seen and heard. But one of the things around systems leadership more broadly, and this applies to the art of storytelling as well, is to bring some of this into our intentional consciousness. And we're doing some of this stuff by design in a planned way and thinking about it. And storytelling is just the same. If we can think about the story that we want to tell, and be structured about it and clear and concise, then it can be much more impactful. And as I say, James, who does that video there, it's 5 minutes, right? And the first 30 seconds is a bit of faffing about while he gets himself ready. So it's a 5 minute, intervention, if you like, but really inspires people to change. So when we're organising conferences and workshops and things like that, when we give speakers 20 minutes or 30 minutes to share their story of a project, maybe we should challenge them to do it shorter and in a more impactful way. So we've discussed the idea of framing, we've discussed the idea of storytelling, and particularly public narrative. The other thing that's about storytelling, which I think is important, is that stories don't necessarily have to be personal experience, but they could be other things that share a meaning. So this quote that narrative is a way to communicate ideas. Philosophy just tastes bad to most people unless you wrap it up in a story. And you'll recognize these stories. And most of you probably can't fully retell the story in detail, but you do know the idea or the lesson or the thought that you're trying to share. So when I say The Boy Who Cried Wolf, the idea in the story, someone shout out, what's the idea of the story of The Boy Who Cried Wolf? Anyone? This is easier in person, isn't it? I'm trying to be as give you an in-person experience online.
Yeah, it's
Don't
really that
lie.
if you keep pretending that you need help, you won't get it when you really need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, if we keep pretending that we need help, or we keep asking for help when we don't really need it, that when the moment comes that we really do need someone to support us, then they may not be there. The Hare and the Tortoise, this idea that, you don't necessarily have to set off at a sprint, but if you're slow and steady and reliable and consistent, you'll probably achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. And the Goose and the Golden Egg. Sometimes we're onto a good thing, but we end up focusing on it so much that we can destroy it, or kill it in this case, in the hope that you'll be able to maximize it. And so that's an important lesson for systems change as well, that if something's going well, sometimes you still need to be patient and consistent and steady, and not go all in on one thing, because it's complex, right? And there's lots of interconnected things. And so whilst we don't know the details of all these stories, we're aware enough of the story that we know what the messages are behind it. And so in your storytelling, we may be in this public narrative space of story of self and story of us and story of now, but it may be that we're in the space of a story that's a more generic, a story about an animal's an idea, a thing that's not so much a story of you, but a story with a meaning, an allegory or a fable. And many of those if you look at Aesop's fables, I was looking at the list of those this week. He's written over 100 fables, all those hundreds of years ago, and so many stories that we can draw on, or examples, and particularly from nature. So if you came to any of the leadership workshops that we did a few weeks ago, we talked about ants and geese and walking dogs, versus walking children, all different kinds of stories. And if you weren't at the workshops, ask one of the colleagues who was there to tell you some of those stories, and maybe in the next phase of our webinar or workshop today. So those are some of the key principles, and so we're going to give you a chance now to put some of that into action just for a few minutes. So as a recap, if we just go back, we're thinking about concise, short stories that are direct, that have a very clear message and an easy structure to follow. A great framework is to think about this idea of story of self, something I've experienced, seen, or is meaningful to me, how that applies to lots of other people, and therefore what's the call to action, what should we do about it, and creating that sense of hope and urgency at the same time. And thinking about other stories that we know that have a really important meaning. So I emailed to you last night, which some of you will have seen, some of you won't, a little framework around planning a story. And it brings all of these things together. So you might not be able to see this very clearly on your screen, but this idea of thinking about what's the frame that I'm trying to tackle? What's the idea or the mindset of my colleagues or people within the system who, what's the frame that I'm trying to change? What's the unhelpful or problematic frame? What would I prefer it to look like in the future? And then what's the story that I might be able to tell to get there? The story of self, the story of us, the story of now. And then some practical things to think about. Who should be telling the story? Is this a story that I should be telling, or is there someone else? When will this happen? What questions or resistance could there be? And what's the key message that I'll share as part of this story? What's the key thing that I'm trying to get away? And you may want to start with this yellow box and then think about the others. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to split you into pairs in breakout rooms. And for the first 5 minutes, up until 11:55, I want you to think, I'll leave this on the screen for you to see, I want you to think about a story that you might be able to tell. So start at the top. What's the frame that's a problem for me? Drawing on what you might have talked about a few minutes ago. How would I like to see it in the future? What story might I tell? And you may not get to these boxes at the bottom, and that's okay, but you could start to think about some of the practicalities. So take 5 minutes to think about it, and then join your breakout room, turn your camera back on. So don't leave the meeting, or else you'll be lost forever. Just flick your camera off, take 5 minutes to think about it using this template, or just a pen and paper and notes. And then you'll have 10 minutes, 5 minutes each, to either share your story, or if you're not comfortable sharing a story or don't feel like you've made enough progress, you can just have a conversation together about storytelling generally. And some of the things that we've talked about today. So I'm going to split into rooms. So to recap that, 15 minutes. 15 minutes, 5 minutes of preparation time, 5 minutes each to share. Great, welcome back everyone. I think we're just waiting for a couple more people to sort of appear back from the internet somewhere. Austin space. Great, I think that's all of us. So hopefully that was really useful in terms of thinking about clearly not enough time, right? Not enough time to think about what you might share, but hopefully that's been a useful discussion and conversation and gives you a flavour of how you might start to more intentionally think about the stories that you tell in terms of shifting some of these frames or paradigms or beliefs or approaches that people have. Now, one of the things that's really, we're not going to spend a lot of time reviewing that because we're going to move on to our collective story as Cardiff and the Vale, and some principles around that. But I think hopefully this is a tool that you've got now and you can think about how do I start to use stories more collectively, and this will feed into what we're going to talk about next. Thanks, Kimberly. Have a nice afternoon. So the final, so we've talked about framing, we've talked about storytelling. We're going to touch on message discipline now, and this is one of the key elements of telling a collective story. So if you really want things to change in Cardiff and the Vale, whether that's around physical activity or whether it's around good food or movement or whatever it might be, the more that we can be telling the same story and giving the same messages, then the more impact we'll have. And this is the idea of message discipline. And I'll share a couple of examples with you in a minute, but the idea that staying on topic and communicating what we want to communicate clearly, memorably, and consistently across teams, across system partners, and over time is going to be one of the key ways in which we change the way we change the system for the better. And in this little graphic on the right hand side, there's a few things. So there's the idea of keeping in sync, pick a few things, prioritize, simplify and clarify, and add emotion, this idea of the storytelling and stay on message. Now, when it comes to systems change and leadership, often we need to stick with our sense of narrative or our stories over a long period of time. And one of the biggest mistakes that we see is people or groups or networks saying, well, we've been talking about that for 3 months now. It's time to move on to something new. And that's quite typical in the sort of sport and leisure sector. You know, you'll have a gym membership offer that lasts for 2 or 3 months, and then we'll move on to a new thing or a different way of framing it and try something else. But consistency is key here. So I've shared with you a couple of examples. Some of you may have seen Greater Manchester's Active Souls messaging or program. So in essence, the message was you've got permission to wear your trainers to work as long as you use them. This idea of wear your trainers with whatever your work attire is, but walk to work, go for a walk at work, be active, take the stairs, but wear Active Souls. And you can see the tweet on the right hand side from Andy Burnham, who's the... Sorry, someone's got a problem with the slides. Is everyone else seeing the Active Souls slide?
Yeah.
So if you can't see them, there's sometimes a little button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen that might like move to live slide or come to current slide. Sometimes you can get stuck behind, but hopefully most people can see them. Apologies if you can't. The tweet on the right-hand side, Andy Burnham's the mayor of Greater Manchester, and you know, he's regularly on message in terms of wearing your trainers to work, Active Souls. And it was both an in-person and online campaign that's been going for about 3 or 4 years now. This idea of wearing trainers to work so that you can be more active. And that's a really good example in the physical activity space of where everyone was just sharing the same message around Active Souls, both verbally communicating it and non-verbally communicating it by wearing their trainers to work. And if you walk around Manchester city centre now, of a lunchtime, for example, you'll see lots and lots of people, men and women, in formal business wear, still suits but with trainers on, shirts and ties but with trainers, and it's a growing sense of norm for people in that space. A more controversial or a story of message discipline. Some of you will have heard me speak about this before. But politicians are pretty good at this. So after the referendum for a year or so, Mr. Johnson and his colleagues were would consistently talk about the fact that we're going to get Brexit done. We didn't know exactly what it meant. We didn't know exactly all the details of that. But over time, a big proportion of the population, whether you were pro or against Brexit, most of us sort of got on board with the message of, well, whatever it is, we just need to get it over and done with now. We just need to get Brexit done. And they were really disciplined in sharing that message all of the time. But they were planned, disciplined. Politicians and cabinet members and ministers were prompted daily to remember that the message was, we're going to get Brexit done. So what are the stories that what is the story of Cardiff and the Vale? What is our story of change? And I think it's really important to reference. So I've been working with places all over England and Wales, and Cardiff and the Vale are light years ahead of many places in terms of your approach to tackling inequality on a systems level, in terms of your understanding of what that means, in terms of your understanding of the key principles, and in terms of some of the work that you're doing. And it's important, I think, to tell some of that story. If we really want the change to be embedded and to gather momentum, we need to do a really good job of telling that story of the things that are changing and the impact that it's having in a more collective and consistent way. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to break you into groups, and we've got a Padlet set up, and I'll put the link to the Padlet in the chat now. And we're just going to take 7 minutes for you to talk about in groups. Well, what are the key things that have changed in our system within our sense of movement and eating well, and good food? What's changed? What difference has that made? Do we have any evidence? And within all of that, what's the key message? What's the key idea? Now, you'll not all get to a point where you necessarily agree that, but any ideas you do have, we'd like you to share in the Padlet as you go. So as you're talking in your groups, share some of those ideas in the Padlet, and it's split into those 4 questions for you. So we'll just take till 20 past in groups just to talk about, well, what is our story of change in Cardiff? We've not got a lot of time left, so I apologise that perhaps we wanted to spend a bit more time on this, or certainly this is a good conversation for you to have in the future. But we'll break into rooms of 4 or 5 people and just take a few minutes to talk about what are the big things that have happened that have made a big difference in our place so far, and what are the key messages that sit inside that story. So hopefully that makes sense, and if you can jot your ideas in Padlet as you go, that'd be really helpful. Great. Welcome back, everyone. Last couple of people joining us now. So just while we're wrapping up, if you want to add anything else to... Sorry, I've not got my camera on there. Welcome back. Hopefully that was a useful beginnings of a discussion, and certainly lots more conversation to have about that. But as I look at the things that you put in the Padlet there, sometimes you perhaps don't realise the difference that's making, or the progress that you've made. The idea that some of you are pooling resources and budgets into certain areas might sound like a thing that you've maybe quite good at that now, and that's happening. That is quite unusual to be happening in a place-based systems context. Like, very few places are reaching that. That's almost the next stage of systems thinking, is we've got a sense of shared purpose. Now, how do we start to share resources and co-invest on it? But it sounds like in small or large ways you're starting to do that, and that's really great, and that's a story worth telling. And a few of you are starting to share what's the key message of our story, and all very similar. You know, that collaborative working is going to make it better for everyone. And so more work to do on that. And of course, we've just done a light touch of some of the early thinking on that today, but hopefully that's prompted you to start to think about, how do we tell stories in a more effective way, and how do we tell our collective stories? So in terms of summary, it's important to think about the frames that we have and the way in which we see the world. There's a commonly shared story about the person who was looking out of their kitchen window at the laundry on the line of the person in the garden next door. And they're thinking, why on earth have they put dirty laundry out on the line? It looks filthy, all of that beautiful white linen and shirts and bedding on the line, and it's all dirty. And then they realised that it was their window that was dirty, not the laundry. So the way in which we see the world is just as important as understanding the way in which other people are seeing things. So the framing is really important. Some key principles of stories, them being concise and simple, structured yet impactful, and then this idea of public narrative. And then we moved on to our collective story, that you're doing some amazing work, and that story needs to be told both locally and more broadly, and that message discipline will help to tell that collective story of understanding what it is that what's the key messages that we're trying to get across collectively, and then having a go at that. And of course, storytelling, like any other leadership skill, it takes practice. And the more you tell your story, the better you'll get at it. The bits that you'll learn to miss out, the bits that you really need to include, the key facts or figures that are in it, the way in which the bits that are meaningful to you in terms of the emotion and feeling element. So practice is really important, and don't be afraid to tell the same stories in more than one place and with some consistency. And what I've discovered is that you get to the point where people say, Ken, we've heard that story before now, it's enough. But you can keep going until someone tells you that they've heard it 10 times already and it's enough, because people will tell you, and then you'll know that you've reached the end of that story's life and you need to adjust it or find a new one. And then most importantly, have fun. I think telling stories and trying to be fun and adding humour and being confident and being open about the fact that you're exploring this art of storytelling. Work's supposed to be fun, and it's challenging and it's difficult, and we're tackling wicked issues and complex problems that make life miserable for people, and I'm conscious of the context of our work. But that's not to say that we can't find some joy. Maybe fun's not the right word, but to find joy in the work that we're doing as well, and know that we're making a difference. So I'm going to stop sharing there. We're going to return to our Menti. I hope that's been useful for you. I'd like you just to go back to our Menti and we're going to visit the same question again. So after that 87 minutes that we've spent together, how are you feeling now? So you should be able to see the Menti code at the top and the QR code at the bottom if you haven't. If you're not still online, hopefully you can see that. And just give you a minute to capture some thoughts there. So hopefully you feel a bit more confident in some of the ways in which you can use stories to influence others. And I think there's more work to do for all places, including Cardiff and the Vale, in terms of, are we telling the right story? What's the key messages that we need to be sharing with our system partners, with politicians, with local people? But hopefully that will emerge and build over time. So I'm just going to stop sharing, but continue to fill that in if you want to. And last but not least, from me, thank you very much for spending time with me today. And our next webinar is on the 18th of July. I'll post the link for that in the chat now. And then if you want to get in touch with me, I'll put my contact details on the screen. And look forward to seeing you in September. So it's my colleague Jamie doing the webinar in July. I'll put that in the chat now. And hopefully that's been useful for you. Thank you very much for being with us, and good luck in your storytelling endeavours in your work in Cardiff and the Vale.